Hi, everyone. We're back here on the Whirling Circles podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Garcia, joined as always by Frank Allen, owner and head instructor with the Wu Tang Physical Culture Association in the Lower East Side of New York City. Frank, how you doing?
I'm fine. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing good, doing good. A little running around this week, but it's good to be finally be on the call with you. So we're through our first month of episodes. It's been going great so far. We've been getting a lot of good views on our YouTube channel, our new YouTube channel. So thank you for everybody who's been checking us out there, subscribing, making comments, engaging with us on there. That's really, really awesome. And of course, people have been writing those reviews on iTunes, which has helped with us getting some more listeners, getting our podcast to more people. So that is amazing too. So thank you to everybody who's been helping out and supporting in that way. And if you haven't already, definitely go check out the Whirling Circles podcast YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. And of course, write that iTunes review if you can for us. We really appreciate all of that. So in the first couple of episodes, we kind of started going over what the internal martial arts were, the three main Chinese internal martial arts. Um, and so hopefully everyone's been able to check out those episodes. But if not, it's okay. You can still listen to this one. And today we're talking about a system that Frank and the Wu Tang P.C.A. Started developing. And so we're going to get into that system and also connect it to, this larger discussion on internal martial arts. But Frank, can you give us a little bit of an overview on what the Fighting for Health system is all about?
Well, in the late 70s, actually a couple of years before I started the Wu Tang Physical Culture Association, I was hanging out with my sparring partners and training partners, and specifically Big Lenny Harris and Little Jan Stacy. And we were discussing that we would like to develop some different ways to spar. And we'd like to go at different aspects of martial arts in a general way. So we came up with this idea, this 5 point program, and then playing around with it, various wacky names. We eventually settled on the Fighting for Health system for the idea of using sparring to actually improve your health. Yeah, it's after coming up with some really crazy stuff, you know, guys and dolls, Fight Club, etc. But and so that's the concept, and the idea was that we came down with the 5 phases, as we called it, would be boxing, kickboxing, grappling, self defense, and weapons. And then the weapons, we were thinking about that every weapon system is developed for its time and place. And we were talking New York City in the late 70s. So we were thinking our weapon system would be based on knife, short stick, and garrison belt. The garrison belt kind of went by the way, but I had loved him. I'd been in those days I was thinner and wore a lot of jeans and belts and went back to my youth of the 50s when the neighborhood tough guys used to wear wide belts with big buckles and they used to actually sharpen the front of the buckle and it was a major thing. But that idea didn't last too long. Um, the knife and the short stick did, and eventually we started playing with, adding more traditional weapons, sword, staff, mostly, and medium sticks, 4 foot stick. Um, boxing, regular but controlled contact boxing. Looking at how that was done. Kickboxing, the same. Grappling started out being based on my high school wrestling, but then evolved into a much more complete system when we got a grappling coach in the 80s. And the same thing, we got a boxing coach in the 80s. They became actually the guys that developed the system with me.
Mm.
Lenny and Jan just kind of thought up the system with me for the general ideas. Lenny was a photographer, New York guy. Jan was actually a village writer who wrote adventure stories. And in fact, it was like he wrote like was basically pulp fiction. He'd do one a month. That's how he made his living. And he figured out that he could, write a book in 3 weeks, and then take a week off every month. But being a regular neighborhood guy, sometimes it got down to two one week and have to chunk out the book in that amount of time. He would do it anyway.
Was he
And he
writing for The
made weird.
Voice? No.
No, no, he was writing for publishing companies, writing these 200-page books, these adventure books.
Oh, nice.
And eventually, like I loved it. At one point, he made a deal with his um, publisher where they said, "Look, we're tired of this martial arts. Everything's martial arts, martial arts, martial arts. We'd rather you didn't do martial arts." He's like, "Look, I'm from a literary family in the West Village who we're all socialists, and I'm tired of having to kill communists, communists, communists. So how about I don't do any more martial arts, and you don't make me kill any more communists?" So they did this deal, and he started writing this hero who was in the post-apocalyptic American wasteland, riding around on a motorcycle with his killer pit bull on the back, killing mutants. He did a whole bunch of those for a while.
Nice.
The last couple of books he did were the Body Smasher books, which was a giant professional wrestler who was that was his front for being actually a CIA agent. But the thing is, he wrote Vern, our boxing coach, and me into it. Vern was the hero's boxing coach. This is in the first book. And there was a character based on me that's simply known as Tattoo, who had a who had a martial arts studio hidden in one of the braces of the Brooklyn Bridge, which at one point I dragged the hero who's all beat to death out of the East River and take him to my studio and cure him by making him stand in universal post for 12 hours.
It sounds pretty accurate, though. I mean, for those who don't know, Frank has a bunch of tattoos on his body, but also too, what from what I hear, is your old studio. It was a little bit of a secret like way to get in there. Like you couldn't just like ring a bell, right?
Yeah, well, you had to eventually you had the phone. Originally, we didn't have a phone. You had to stand outside and yell, and then
It wasn't like a football.
somebody would throw you the key. And eventually, when we softened up, we put the key in a foam football and threw you the foam football. Originally, I just had a little key case and I'd throw it like a throwing star. But when we got commercial, we softened that up to a nice Nerf football with a slot in it and whatnot. But yeah, that's how you had to get in. You had to know
Nice.
how to get in. But oh yeah, and the first book is also dedicated to me and Vern and the guys at the Wu Tang gym.
Very cool.
It's Body Smasher. Hard to find these days. I got a copy, of course,
Yeah.
but it was really good. But those guys helped me think it up. And then the Wudang actually started in April of 1979 in Jan Stacy's storefront on Lafayette Street. That was our first studio, this little tiny storefront.
Mm.
And, I never had more than, I don't think, four students at once anyway.
Hmm.
And we did a lot of boxing, kickboxing, rubber knife sparring, and cardboard tube stick fighting in this little space. But it actually started in Jan's little storefront on Lafayette Street next to the firehouse. And generally, to talk about fighting for health, eventually I worked out these five adages, which turned out to be the basis that the system rotates around. And the first one's a health and focus adage, which is nothing relieves stress like hitting someone.
Mm.
And nothing gives you confidence like learning that you can be hit, take it, and keep coming forward.
Oh yeah.
Health and focus, stress relief, the best stress relief in the world, hitting someone. Best confidence builder, knowing you can take it, keep rolling. Adage number two is friends hitting friends. Fight with your friends regularly, and you'll never have to fight with anyone
Mm.
else. And the whole thing is that we're talking about contact fighting here. Guys that do contact all the time, people, we had a lot of women trained this also, but people that do contact have a certain feeling, a certain aura about them that generally makes most of the people on the street not want to bother you. They're not looking for a fight, they're looking for a mark.
Right.
And you can just give off the vibe of not being a mark if you happen to train regularly with contact. So fight with your friends regularly. You never have to fight with anyone else. Doesn't mean you don't, but you didn't have to.
Right.
Fitness. Never hit any harder than you want to get hit back. Full speed and half power is a workout. Beyond that's a fight.
Mm.
And never, ever, ever follow up on a stunned opponent. Remember from the other shows, we're supposed to be doing conscious action, so you're not going to hit somebody on reflex. You're conscious of what's going on all the time. So if you see that little stagger, that little eye cross, that little thing that says he's slightly stunned, you back off and wait till he clears up.
Hmm.
And if you never hit any harder than you want to get hit back, of course, ranges from beginners get to just tap each other. Sometimes the experienced guys are really wail because you're both into it. But it's when you're doing that that you got to be careful that you never, ever, ever follow up on a stunned opponent. Meditation. Contact sparring is the most effective method of be here now meditation.
Mm.
No other version of be here now meditation will point out to you as quickly or graphically that your awareness has drifted from the here and now. Because if your awareness drifts, you get hit. Yes,
That's right.
precisely. And I've said for years and years, contact sparring is the best version of be here now meditation that there is because it really keeps you in the here and now. And then number five, the really most important one, we sort of call enlightenment, although anybody that's been around me know that I'm not super huge on the concept of enlightenment, but we called it that anyway. Maintaining your awareness and internal principles while a friend punches you in the face is much easier and really just practice for maintaining your awareness and internal principles during an actual life crisis, which is actually just practice for maintaining your awareness and internal principles for the day you die.
Mm.
If you can't hold it together while a friend hits you with a padded glove, you're not going to hold it together in a major health crisis, a major financial crisis, a major emotional crisis. And if you can't learn to hold it together in that, you won't hold it together when the big day comes.
Mm.
So it's all training for that, which we say make contact sparring, make sure awareness and internal principles practice useful and practical. So those are our five fighting adages of why we're going about this whole thing. And then on the other hand, it's just fun to spar.
Yeah. Well, I got
So
a
it's like,
bunch of questions on those. So, well, not quite. Yeah, questions like to pick on them. So, one, do you think? I mean, I think about it with like you see kids all the time play fighting. Well, maybe not as much anymore, right? Because some of the parents now are they don't let the kids play fight. But you talk about like how sparring and which is kind of like play fighting, right? This kind of controlled fighting that we did as kids. But just how you talk about how it's a confidence booster and provides all this kind of mental health. Do you think that a lot of people would deal with stress better and anxiety better and all the kind of obstacles that we deal with in life if we were doing more kind of sparring and having that physical contact with another human?
absolutely, absolutely. It teaches you how to deal with conflict, which is going to come up. It teaches you how to deal with hard times in your life, which are going to come up. If you have a perfectly easy childhood and you never have any conflicts or problems that come up, they're going to come up in your adulthood and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have no idea how to deal with them. Plus, fighting is one of the two most natural methods of playing. You look at animals, they only have two games, fight and chase.
Yep.
That's it, fight and chase. And that makes them the most natural methods of play.
Mm-hmm.
I know we had a billion variations of fight, you know, with sword fighting and attacking the castle fighting and pirates and army and as well as just boxing and wrestling and etc. But yeah, it's natural. It's a natural method of an outlet for younger beings, not just people, younger beings. That's what they do. They fight and they chase and it prepares them for life.
Yeah, and I also found with my daughter, I have a 5-year-old daughter who is a martial artist, and I mean, it does so much for her to engage in this stuff. But I mean, outside of just like her learning her little forms and stuff like that, when she's wrestling with her friends or with me, we'll do like jujitsu kind of stuff in the house, or, I think it's just such a confidence builder for her on a couple of levels. One as a young person, just general confidence, and then also as a girl, because sometimes girls are told not to engage in those kind of activities because it's not ladylike or whatever. So I think it's
Uh,
good that we're having that conversation about everyone engaging in it.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I first started fighting for health in regular classes, when we turned into a more commercial organization in the early 90s, one of the first thing I did was I ran a 2.5 year Fighting for Health instructors program for women. And we had a bunch of women from the neighborhood and friends of women from the neighborhood that came in and trained in this system. I think there's only about three of them that actually made it to instructor, but that wasn't bad. And people trained really, really well. I mean, and you never know when it's going to come up. As one girl was working as an exotic dancer, and some guy jumped on the, she got fired, but some guy jumped on the stage one day and went to grab her, and she left hooked him and knocked him right off the stage. Uh,
Good for her.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so it's absolutely a confidence builder, and especially for young women who were taught when they were younger they weren't supposed to do this stuff.
Right.
And I mean, we had a couple of women make it to Golden Gloves level, and probably the most accomplished fighter in the whole gym was one of these women. Won 3 matches in the Golden Gloves and went and fought in the finals in Madison Square Garden. Lost a close decision to a young woman who, like 2 years later, was contending for the professional title in their weight class. And interesting enough, she's so intense in boxing. And I see her occasionally. She doesn't train anymore, but I see her occasionally. And she says the only times that she's put on gloves since then were a few of my birthday parties where I offer to box everybody. She hasn't boxed at all since then, but she's a was before and is now a very, very serious artist. Had art shows in Paris and whatnot. And she's become the archetypical reclusive genius artist. But
Yes, yes.
for that couple of years, I mean, she was like one of the best.
Yeah. And then, so also you talking about fighting and sparring and all this stuff as a form of meditation. That sounds really counter to what a lot of people are thinking about when they think of meditation. When they're thinking is just be quiet, close your eyes, be quiet, try to hold your breath, try to hum a song.
Yeah, well, that's not what we consider meditation anyway. Meditation is focused mind, and then focused mind doing certain things like preparing your energy system, preparing your body, reaching out of your body to the infinite. But it all begins with being able to focus your mind. What the Taoists call calming the monkey mind. Usually your thoughts jump from limb to limb like a monkey, and they don't even finish a thought before they go to the next one. Being able to focus your mind and learning to be completely in the here and now. And if you've ever done any Zen, that's what it's about. That's what most of the meditation systems are about. At first, learning to keep one track of thought and stay in the here and now. And focused fighting is that. You stay in the here and now. And especially if you're doing internals with conscious movement, you're absolutely staying in the here and now and knowing what's going on. And even the guys doing unconscious reflexive action, it may be reflexive and it may be semi conscious, but it's still the here and now. There's no thinking about last night's television show or tomorrow's date or whatnot. Or if you do, you pay for it. You may find yourself thinking about nothing. End up like, I think it's Floyd Patterson that said getting knocked out's the most embarrassing thing in the world. It's like going to the bathroom in public. Um, he also talked about getting knocked out once. And he said these strange thoughts go through your head. Like he opened his eyes and looked and said, why is the commissioner sitting sideways? Like, because his head was on.
Yep. And I
So
think
it,
also
you
too, yeah.
really,
Go
so
ahead.
you really got to stay in the here and now, and it forces you to stay in the here and now. like no other system. It's not like, oh, I've drifted off, I'll pull it back. You get reminded immediately if you've left the here and now at all. And one of the basic meditations of every system I've ever been around is you begin with learning to keep conscious in the here and now and get rid of all the distractions.
Right. Yeah. I remember the first time I really got punched in the face or really, got slammed to the floor. I think a lot of we're not being like overly machismo. Oh, you gotta take a licking to be a real man kind of thing. It's not about that. I remember the first time I got hit, realizing, oh, I thought that was gonna hurt more, or seeing blood come out of my nose, thinking like, oh, this is really not that big a deal. It's just a little blood. I can work through this, and so you think that uh, taking people to those kind of physical limits, or not even limits, those are just kind of like basic kind of things, right? Just getting a little bump and a bruise. People are probably not doing any of that. People are being so protective of their bodies that they're really making themselves weak and vulnerable for real danger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're not learning how to deal with stuff. Because I sort of overlearned how to deal with stuff being one of the smallest kids in the neighborhood with one of the biggest mouths. Um, I spent a lot of time, but that's not necessary. But been there, done that. Big mouth, small kid. But it does. You learn how to deal with hardship. And, hardship comes around. You never know when. And I mean, my mom died when I was pretty young. I was 14. I think one of the reasons I could deal with it is because I'd had a pretty tough childhood up until then. So hardship was hardship, and you learn to deal with it.
And doing it in a controlled environment with an instructor, sparring partners, makes it really not only getting some hardship in this form of physical activity, but also it being in a controlled environment, supportive environment. So that makes all the difference when you talk about fighting for health, right?
Yes, it makes a lot of difference. And plus, in this day and age, nobody's letting the kids fight. I mean, if you get in a fight in the school ground now, somebody calls the cops. When you got in a fight in the school ground when I was a kid, maybe a teacher came out and broke you up, and maybe not. I mean, we had one teacher in junior high school. If two guys wanted to go at it, we had those movable desks. He would make a square out of the desk, turn the lights off, and let them go. It's like those days are over, of course. But
Yeah.
because they're not allowed to like scrap on the streets these days, getting these controlled programs where they can actually learn how to deal with the hardships of controlled sparring. Really, I think it is necessary because there's so many people coming up that are just going to have, and already up, that have no idea how to deal. I mean, teenage boys needing a safe space because their feelings have been hurt. What the hell happened to sticks and stones will hurt me, but sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I mean, it's gone now. Oh, he hurt my feelings. I have to go to the safe space. Well, what's that person going to do when they suddenly find themselves dead broken without a job, or someone really close to them dies, or a real life crisis? They're going to just fall apart and drift
Right.
away.
Well, also too, I mean, on a scientific level, I know that adrenaline, the secretion of adrenaline is really supposed to be like a drip, and that only can be developed if you're under, constant stimuli in terms of nurturing adrenaline production in a good way. When you don't have any adrenaline production, then you hear a noise behind you and you get startled. The adrenaline is just flooding, so people are so nervous, right? Their nerves are so walking around, and they don't know how to deal with these kind of fears that it rushes in, and it can cause an even scarier situation. Kids getting guns and bringing them to schools, and all these kind of things start manifesting.
Yep, yep. And video games teaching people to the kids start to think that shooting somebody is shooting a blip on the television, and they don't get the reality of what guns are about because no one takes them out and teaches them what guns are about and how the first thing you learn about guns is gun safety. And that used to be normal. That used to be completely normal. I mean, I was living with a single mom, And she was a very, very religious woman, totally religious, peaceful, sweet, nice. But just the times and the way it was when I got to be 12 years old, I was supposed to learn how to shoot. And there was no dad on the scene, but a member of our church was the head of the local NRA. And she went to him and said, "Hey, Russ, Frankie's 12 years old now. Can you take him to the range and teach him how to shoot?" That's just what it was like. And it's not like that anymore. Now,
Mm,
people's whole image of shooting comes from shows and video games. And because
mm,
it's unrealistic, they're much more likely to actually engage in it.
mm. So when y'all were developing the Fighting for Health system, kind of it sounds like the early years. I mean, even probably still to today of the Wudang was really a testing center for this system and developing the system. Was there? Did you find that there wasn't a lot of sparring happening in other martial arts spaces, or was there more of a focus on forms in other martial arts spaces, and then sparring was happening more in like boxing spaces, and you were trying to bridge the two? What was that? What was where was that need coming from to have more sparring?
Well, we're trying to make sure that we got sparring. We also considered it fun. I mean, at one point, I used to tell people I do the rest of this stuff so that I could spar. But it depended on the school. I mean, there are schools that that's what they do. That's all they do is fight. I mean, there are Kyokushinkai karate schools in New York City, and that's all those guys do is fight. And but it's particularly with the Tai Chi and internal arts schools, there are very few of them that actually fought. William Chen's school always fought, and his disciple Cecil Chu carried on with the same thing, and we did it. But we're about the only three schools that were considered Tai Chi schools that were sending people to the fighting tournaments and whatnot. So it was a matter of doing internal martial arts that we had to develop the fighting. A lot of the, I mean, the praying mantis people were fighting more. The tiger claw people ran the roughest, toughest tournaments coming and going in New York City for about a couple of decades. But it was a matter of Tai Chi schools didn't really fight. So we wanted to develop our own system of things to make sure that we had plenty of sparring. Because, like I said, besides all the factors we've been talking about, the guys that started this and the guys in the early 80s, we just thought it was fun.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is. I mean, I would say for someone who's never done any kind of sparring work, it's probably like scary and people are intimidated by it. But it's actually not as intimidating as one would think. And once you start doing it, it starts bringing up, at least for me, memories of childhood and play fighting and just housing around with my sister, all that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, it's less intimidating, I think, than people think. So there is a lot of people who spar though for sport development, like they're in one of the martial sports, a boxer, jujitsu artist, all this kind of stuff. Is there anything different that y'all do in the fight for change system that's different than developing fighting for a sport?
Well, the sparring is done as sport fighting. Sport fighting is meant to be safe. Anything that's going to seriously injure anybody is taken out of it. And when you're doing contact fighting in a martial arts gym, that's the way you do it. But we also train not full contact and stress the difference between, which I think I mentioned before, the difference between sport fighting and martial arts and close quarters combat. So we make it a point that people know that your sport fighting is not all out fighting. And in an all out fight, you got to be ready for stuff that's not going to come up in sport fighting. I mean, like small digit manipulation. When you learn self defense or you learn the basic combat, Japanese jujitsu or something like that, one of the first things you learn is somebody grabs you and you separate their little finger and bend it back and break it.
Mm-hmm.
And in like almost um, 20 years of the UFC, you've never seen anybody do that. You've never seen anybody do that. And that would have been one of the most basic things. It's a difference between full fighting and sport fighting, but you want to mostly practice sport fighting because it gives you the contact. You get used to the contact. You learn basic techniques, but you also have to be aware of the difference of, as opposed to somebody get poked in the eye and they get 10 minutes to make sure they can still see it. If they can't, the fight stops to somebody poking you in the eye to take you out and get you off the street or get you to leave them alone, even whatever. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in full fighting that doesn't happen in sport fighting, and we try to make that clear. Although we are doing sport fighting, we'll practice the totally controlled, non-contact to non-vital point contact techniques of how you would amp it up on the street.
Well, also too, if we're doing that education on where the vital points are and kind of avoiding them during sparring, then we know where to potentially apply them if we need to in a non-sport engagement. You recently
Go,
did a work. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just about to say we did this street awareness and self-defense workshop this weekend, and I was also teaching using knife and stick to defend yourself. And one of the things I was pointing out was where you don't want to hit, cut, or stab somebody because you will kill them. And if you kill them, you will be in a lot of trouble no matter what they were doing to you. So it's like I make it a point in those things to teach the kill points as the places to avoid. Because if you've got a weapon, there are ways to stop people without doing that. And the last thing you want to do is kill somebody by mistake because there's going to be a lot of recriminations there. No matter, they could have been trying to kill you. And unless you can absolutely prove that, there's going to be huge recriminations if you kill them. So one of the things we're doing was going over the kill points and how to avoid them and what to do instead of going for them.
Yeah, I mean, also too, I think in New York State, at least, it's different from state to state. But in New York State, I mean, if you engage in some physical altercation and it looks like you initiated it, even if you were in a self defense or defending yourself kind of position, if someone was aggressive towards you, but somehow on a camera phone you got caught doing the first strike, which might be likely if you're a martial artist anticipating something and attacking first. You could get into a lot of trouble. There might be a case against you, even though you were the victim. So yeah, it's important to know that kind of stuff. How'd the workshop go?
Very well.
Awesome,
Went
awesome.
very well. Very well. And of course, you also have to judge how violent you think the other person's going to get. We actually have a section of my self-defense workshops that go back to my old boxing coach and a couple other people, which we call "Get 'em while they're still talking," because this guy's
Mm-hmm.
gotten so violent in his voice, and he's obviously amping himself up to really try and hurt you. And he's somebody who's large or steroided out or speeded out or whatnot. And you figure once he starts to go, he's going to be a problem. So there's a couple of techniques that you do to stop them and get away before they do their thing.
Yeah, that's a
But I
big
also
deal. Part
point
of
out
it.
in self-defense is making enough room to leave and leaving.
That's right.
Any point you have the option to leave and you don't, it's no longer self-defense.
That's
I mean,
right.
even if you stayed to protect your little daughter, it's righteous, but it's not self-defense anymore. It's bodyguard.
Right. Right.
If you stay to protect property, it's security guard. Their advanced subject self-defense is make enough room to leave and get out of there. I always
That's right.
stress that in self-defense. But days have changed. Days have changed. The old days are just not what they used to be. I mean, my people that actually worked out the system with me, my boxing coach and grappling coach, are both wild men that just you can't act like that anymore these days at all. Vern, the Bulldog Williams, was our boxing coach who actually became my best friend and my mentor, and really wonderful, wonderful older guy. But he was wacky. He didn't put up with anything. He was a little short guy, 5'6", built like a barrel, probably 180 at 5'6". And like one of the examples is when he was in his late 50s, he used to walk around Washington Square Park with the older guys, and the younger guys used to run around the other direction. And he saw this big yuppie looking guy used to shoulder the old man out of the way when he went by. And one day he did it to Vern. And in the next cycle, when he came by, Vern was just like yelling at him like this. And to the day he died, he couldn't go past that without losing it and start yelling, I was doing this. He jumped on me. I can't believe it. He jumped on me. He jumped on me. Yeah, but what happened? But he jumped on me. What happened? He jumped. What happened? Well, I stuck my fingers in his eyes and got back up. And so, what happened then, Vern? You got up? and he hit me. I'm old. He hit me. I'm old. He hit me. He hit me. I'm old. What happened, Vern? No, what happened, Vern? Well, I hit him back. What happened then, Vern? Well, he mumbled something about enough, and I said, I don't think yet, and hit him a couple more times. So then the police showed up, and this big black lady grabbed me, and she's dragging me back. And I'm screaming, I'm old. He hit me. I'm old. He hit me. And she says, but he's the man doing the bleeding. That was Vern.
You just beat his ass. Oh man.
That
So
was
so
that
yeah,
was
it's
Vern.
a
And then
different
like
time. It's a different
the
time,
day,
right?
the day he turned 65, he came out of his house in the West Village, walked out to Sixth Avenue, and got a cab. Went to open the cab door, and some yuppie kid in his 30s comes and pushes him out of the way and gets in the cab. And because Vern grabs him and throws him out of the cab. Goes to get in, the guy closed the door on Vern's leg. So he gets out of the cab, and the guy does one of these. You want some of this, old man? Vern says, I looked at him and said, young, big, can't fight a lick. Vern moves in, the guy throws a punch. Vern ducks underneath, right in the mouth, left in the chest. Blam! The guy hits the ground. He hears us cheering, and these Russian construction crew he was friends with had run over to help the old man. And when they realized they didn't need help, they just stood on the sidewalk applauding him. And he gets in the cab, and the cab driver, who's also old, goes, That's great, buddy. I was waiting for you. Where you want to go?
Free
And then
ride.
they bring him over to my neighborhood where he goes to a body worker he was headed for,
Hmm.
spends an hour getting body work, comes up to my house to tell me the story. And
Hmm.
I look, this is how hard he hit. I look, it's like an hour and a half later at least. Can still see the guy's button prints in Vern's left fist where he hit him in the chest.
Dang. Just two
That
punches.
guy probably had a phobia about old men for the rest of his life.
Hopefully, hopefully. So how has the system developed over the years? You know, with the initial focus with the boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, how's it all developed, and what does it look like today?
Well, today we mostly do boxing. The grappling went the wayside when I lost my studio. We've never had any mat situation again. So we did that. And self defense and weapons comes up in workshops. We do self defense and weapons workshops periodically. And mostly, occasionally, kickboxing comes up, but we haven't been doing tournaments for a while. The guys prefer boxing. So it's mostly drifted down to mostly the boxing phase. Although the grappling phase was incredible when we had a grappling coach in the mid 80s, about the same time that Vern came. Dangerous Doug Westlake appeared.
Mm.
And he was a Renaissance man. He was a piano tuner who tuned pianos in Broadway. He was a pianist. He grew some wild weed. He could brew tremendous beer himself. He was a excellent carpenter. He worked as a bouncer in clubs. He was this amazing guy, but he's primarily a grappler. And he was new jujitsu. He did a lot of Wally J's small circle jujitsu, and he was getting into the new submission grappling and whatnot. So he took our grappling program and expanded it drastically from what we were doing was basically high school wrestling just to get the
Hmm.
feel of close contact. And but he was another crazy man. He was convinced he could never be knocked out, and I don't think he could. Because he got the idea when he was kicked in the head by a horse, it should have killed him when he was 7, and it didn't even knock him out. And and
That's a way to build
and
confidence.
yes, it was. And like the definitive story of him was back there in the 80s, you had gangs that were hanging out on the Brooklyn Bridge and waiting for somebody to go by with a decent bicycle and then smacking them with a board when they fell off the bike,
Oh.
jumping up and stealing the bicycle. And he and his wife were bicycling across the bridge, and all of a sudden somebody hit him in the face with a 2x4 with a nail in it, knocked him down, tore his chin,
With a
and of
nail
course
in the
he
two
just
by four.
yeah.
Oh.
And he jumps up, and the kid swings it again and buries a 2x4 in his thigh. And he pulls his thigh back and pulls the board out of the kid's hands, and then pulls the nail out of his leg and laughs at the kid while he does it. So this freaks him out. So they, by this time, they're scared. Who is this crazy man? So they run off, but one of them grabs his bag of tools while he's running. So in this shape, he jumps on his bicycle, chases a kid, catches up with him before he even gets off the bridge, and bulldogs him off the bike, and then picks him up and holds him over the edge of the bridge, where the kid screams, "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" And then he throws him back on the bridge, and his wife takes him to the hospital, and he gets sewed up. But Doug was like, he'd also had this project for years of how much
Uh,
pain can I take? How much pain can I take?
mm,
Now, when he left New York, he moved to the LA area and he got out there. And a little while he got and he said, Frank, I just can't do it anymore. You don't get in street fights out here. He said, the
mm,
minute anything happens, somebody pulls out a gun and shoots you.
mm.
He said, there's just no way to get in street fights out here. I can't test my pain anymore. So he said, I had to think, what do I like, dislike as much as pain? What bothers me as much as pain? He said, oh, humiliation. I probably hate that worse than pain. So he found this little mean woman Korean piano teacher who taught her students by humiliating the hell out of them and studied with her until he was her top student so that he could learn to take humiliation now that he couldn't practice taking pain. That was
Uh,
Dangerous Doug Westlake who developed our grappling program for us. And so we sort of considered the three like fighting for health masters where Vern was a boxing master and Doug was a grappling master and I got to cover the Chinese martial arts. And we're sort of the founding mainstays of the fighting for health system.
mm. And so going back to the name of Fighting for Health, you talked about the meditation, the confidence builder. What are some other things in that name, Fighting for Health, that you think stand out? Like how is the health
Well,
development happening?
well, the other thing is it's an amazing exercise as long as you're not, as long as you're maintaining that, not hitting any harder and you want to get hit back and never ever following up on a stunned opponent and knowing how to deal with any minor injuries that come up, it really builds your health. I mean, look at professional fighters. If they're not getting beat up badly, they're some of the healthiest, most in shape people on the planet. And so the training itself is just a really good health exercise, especially when it's done like internal martial arts training with relaxation, focus, awareness, diaphragmatic breathing, um, the whole relaxation of the body while it's learning to move. So you get those relaxed, springy muscles and connective tissue. The movements, because you're moving your whole body, the organs are getting massaged. You're
Mm.
pumping the fluids of your system. It's basically a really healthy exercise.
And are you? I know we've talked about this before offline, but I know you in the system. For the boxing stuff, we use some gloves, but not using padded helmets or anything, huh?
No, because there's that whole thing of only hitting as hard as you want to get hit back and never following up on a stunned opponent. When people generally get hurt, it's because they get stunned and then they get hit a couple more times. And also, we're telling people you're not trying to knock the guy out. There's a big difference. It's like that was the difference of the Fujao Pai tournaments. Most of the other tournaments were controlled contact. Fujao Pai was 10-ounce gloves, mouth guards, cups, and try to knock each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Made a huge difference. They did get some injuries. But another thing that we stress is you are not trying to knock the person out ever. You're just trying to score on them.
Mm. And with that, and if you got these padded helmets or I mean, what the issue with a lot of these is that you get hit and you think that you're okay because you're not getting cut or something like that, but you're definitely getting some impact on your head there.
Well, yeah, even more. Um, Fight headgear does not protect you from concussion. Now, if you look at statistics, amateurs with headgear died from concussive effects as much as pros without them. That's why they're now starting to eliminate them from amateur competition also. Because not only do they not protect your head, but your head just got an inch and a half bigger target than it was to get hit. It's got extra weight, so it's going to snap around more on the neck. And of course, you get knocked out not from getting hit here, but from when you get hit here, your head snaps and your brain slaps up against the opposite side of the brain pan, and the head will actually flop and snap more with a headgear on it. It destroys your peripheral vision. It's primarily for two things. It's developed basically so that the pros would not get cut up and bruised before their fight actually came. It wasn't going to protect him from concussion. It was going to keep him from getting cut up and bruised before the
Mm,
fight. And then it became a thing where, for the amateurs, it made the parents happy because they thought it was
right.
protecting them from concussion. But really, it wasn't. I used to love to try and talk people into wearing headgear. Well, I didn't. Yes, wear the headgear. You'll like it. You won't get bruised.
But yeah,
And
like
then
I
you,
mean, the Olympics they try to present it as like a more moral and safer type of boxing,
oh, you
or
must have
like
missed it.
women's.
As
Did
of the
they
last
eliminate it?
Olympics, Shawn, no more headgear in men's boxing. Now here's
Oh,
the
men's.
weird, like misogynistic thing. They still have the women wearing headgear
Yeah,
because they don't want the girls to get bruised up. They get banged up, but don't let them get bruised up.
yeah.
But no, they took the headgear off of the men again.
Well,
And
that's a
remember
good
you go
move, but
back,
they need to do it for everybody.
yeah. And remember you go back to the 1976 team, the last really great team we had, where we had I think about six gold medal winners, Spinks brothers and Howard Davis and Sugar Ray Leonard, Willie Randolph,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no headgear then.
Yeah.
So it was really a relatively short time period when they decided that they were going to wear headgear. And they've figured out as of the last Olympics, no more headgear for the men.
That's smart. So, I feel like a lot of times when people are doing light sparring, or engaging in any of this kind of work, that it's usually when it's a beginner versus a beginner that injuries happen. People hurt each other. They're not as conscious, engaged. They're not, holding back. That sometimes they get a little angry if they get hit with something. I mean, one of my worst sports injuries was in jujitsu, when I was a white belt sparring with another white belt. We're rolling, and I got caught in this arm bar, and the guy almost broke my arm. Of course, that would never happen, hopefully, with a higher belt. But what do you say to people when they are engaging in this kind of sparring work? What's the best practices so that they can start developing that skill of just having this soft contact kind of stuff?
Well, first off, I'd like to point out it doesn't have to just be white belt versus white belt. It's a standard adage in karate that the black belts get hurt mostly sparring the white belts, not sparring each
Right.
other.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Trying
and
to
the
teach
whole
a
thing is when
beginner.
you
Yeah.
yes, and when you have beginners sparring, they need a lot of supervision. You can't just let them fight and no one's watching them.
Mm-hmm.
Beginners must be supervised closely and minutely, technique by technique. And that's the answer. What happens is you got a big class, you're all beginners, and you let them all spar at the same time. You can't watch them all. And that becomes a problem.
So for the
So the big thing is,
instructors need to make sure that they're not having large groups of beginners going at once, so that they can have more engagement with the beginners, and also just really, really being on top of beginners when they're sparring. And then for the beginners, what are they thinking about?
well, they're just learning. First off, they get too excited. That's why you need supervision for somebody to stop them, calm them down, let them start again. But not they're beginners. So it's, they tend to, that adrenaline gets in there. It's actually fear. More people go harder in fear. It's like they say a scared man with a weapon is much more dangerous than an angry man with a weapon because that fear factor really drives them to
Mm,
do stuff. And it happens with beginners before they learn to relax and not be fearful in their sparring. So the key is close supervision.
yeah, that makes sense. And then also knowing that it's a skill that you want to develop, so that you're able to engage in these activities more regularly. I feel. And eventually, if you become a more intermediate or advanced student, being able to teach that skill to beginners, and you not get hurt in the process, like you were saying.
Yeah, when I first developed it closely in the early 80s, I was teaching my son and his buddies, which were really weird. They're a bunch of guys that got together in junior high school. And it just worked out. There was my son, one of his best friends. His mother was a Tai Chi instructor, fairly well known Tai Chi instructor these days. The other one, his mother had for years been the girlfriend of my first teacher, Jan Lang. Another kid, his father was another well-known Tai Chi instructor. Another kid, his father was a pretty well-known Aikido instructor. And these martial arts instructors, kids just kind of came together. And they didn't do that much martial arts per se. They'd grown up little bits because of their parents, but they're at that age where they didn't want to do anything with their parents anymore. And I got them to actually, when they were like 14, 15, 16, 17, come train at my place in Fighting for
Mm-hmm.
Health. And it was interesting. The two wild guys that used to hurt the other people were the kids that never fought in the street.
Mm.
The guys that had fought in the street took to it easily and really could control things and whatnot. And this one kid who'd never fought in the street, just you could see the fear come over him, but it was like a pit bull type of thing. Not, you've got it scares me, run away, and then you got the pit bull thing, it scares me, kill it.
Mm.
And you'd see the fear come over, and all of a sudden he'd be going straight in and swinging as hard as he could, and you'd have to get control of him before anything happened. And this other kid, when the fear came, he just automatically kicked people in the balls. It's like it's so much. Do not do that, Jethro. It's like do not do that.
Groin strikes are a good
But
self-defense technique for sure.
yeah, but they're not supposed to be doing it in kickboxing much as in boxing. Um, but yeah, it was interesting. The two guys that we really had to watch and keep control of, and eventually they got it. Eventually they learned not to. But the guys that started out getting carried away and had to be careful they didn't hurt anybody were the two completely inexperienced guys with the fear
Right.
factor.
Right. And so, if so, for folks who are interested in this system, what do your classes look like? Like, how do you structure your classes? What does the practice look like?
Um, it varies because these days, of course, we don't have that much space. They only happen in the good weather because you can't exactly do it on Zoom. uh, when the weather's decent, which is quite a bit of the year. In the backyard, we have them, and you start with a series of warm ups. Then we have a series of warm ups that you do, and then it varies. Maybe you're going to start with your techniques, your stances, your defense, your bobbing and weaving, shifting and circling, doing your basic punches and learning your combinations. Or some days we'll start off instead, we'll do the progression of after they warm up, they'll do some push hands, then they'll do some row show. Then they'll do a slow sparring thing that I worked out, which is sort of the push hands of Fighting for Health.
Mm.
And then at the end of class, we'll do some sparring. But again, keeping it under control. But and almost always now these days, the sparring is boxing, like I said. And there's just a few guys. The days of having my own studio and a bunch of people that came to fight have gone by the wayside. Most of my students now are internal martial arts. Most of my students now are older. But we get a few people that get together and still do Fighting for Health.
Awesome, awesome. Definitely a good model though for people to start implementing if they're somewhere where they're not in New York City, they can't access the Wu Tang P.C.A. Starting to think about how to engage more in light sparring and bring it into their practice, and it just has tremendous benefits for your health, for your martial arts practice, mental health, and then to bring over into your daily life to deal with stress, anxiety, all these kind of things that are just like massive problems in our society today. Not that they haven't been there before, but today more than ever, you just see anxiety and stress just like overwhelming people and killing people, really, diseases just taking hold of people because stress levels are so high in the average, person these days.
Yeah, eventually, I guess maybe I'll do a book on it. It's funny, back when it started, back when I first was mentioning Big Lenny Harris and Jan Stacy, the writer, one of the first things we talked about was doing a book. And we actually got it to where we had 20 or 30 pages of notes and a whole bunch of photographs that Lenny had done. Like I said, Lenny was a photographer, and I dragged him around with me for about 20 years before God knows where they went to. And it never got beyond that particular stage. But maybe someday we'll actually do that.
That would be great, for sure. Cool, man. Well, thanks so much, Frank. Great learning about the system. And for those who are interested in actually say, taking some classes in the system, we're, of course, in the winter months, so classes aren't as regular for it, I'm sure, going into December and January. But then come, the springtime, hopefully we'll get some more classes going on and get the Boys and Girls Fight Club popping off in spring 2021.
That'd be cool.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, Frank. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you next
All
week,
right.
Shawn.